This raises immediately the question what any prosperous group may owe to others not so well placed. This is not only a reflective demand for social deliberation, part of what Immanuel Kant called a categorical imperative, but is also a part of enlightened business operation. There is, as it happens, a very well-established tradition as a part of Indian business to do just that, particularly well exemplified by the Tatars, for example, beginning with Jamshedji, through various socially valuable activities such as building hospitals, research centers, and other social institutions of high distinction. I'm impressed to see that many of the major IT leaders seem to be very seized of this challenge. If that possible role is obvious enough, as I think it is, there is some need to understand better other roles in which the IT industry can make a very big difference in India. As it happened, the key to the success of IT, namely accessibility, systematization, and use of information, is also very central to social evaluation and societal change. There is, in fact, a very foundational connection between information and social obligation, since the moral and, of course, the political need to pay attention to others depend greatly on our knowledge and information about them. Indeed, already in the 1770s, more than 200 years ago, 230 years ago, that remarkable Scottish philosopher, David Hume, had noted the importance of increased intercourse, increased connections through trade and what was early globalization, 18th century was the beginning of globalization as we know it, in expanding the reach of our sense of justice. Hume had put the issue thus in his chapter called Of Justice in his book, in case you're interested, An Enquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals. I quote from Hume. Again, suppose that several distinct societies maintain a kind of intercourse of mutual convenience and advantage. The boundaries of justice still grow larger in proportion to the largeness of men's view and the force of their mutual connections. History, experience, reason sufficiently instruct us in this natural progress of human sentiments and in the gradual enlargement of our regard to justice in proportion as we become acquainted with the extensive utility of that virtue, unquote. Negligence of suffering of others is sustainable, given human interest in justice and equity, only when we know little about that suffering. More information in itself goes a long way to breaking the chain of apathy and indifference. This foundational connection also gives the information industry a huge opportunity to help India through what it can do in the systematization and dissemination of the diverse sources of information in India about the lives of the underdogs of society, those who do not have realistic opportunity of getting good schooling, basic schooling even, essential health care, elementary nutritional requirements, and rudimentary equity across the barriers of class and gender. This can also be said about problems of underdeveloped physical infrastructure, water, electricity, roads, etc., as well as social infrastructure that restrain the broad mass of Indians from moving ahead faster. There are particular causal connections also here. An enterprise that hugely depends on the excellence of education for its success, as the IT sector clearly does, has good reason, I think, to consider its broad responsibility to Indian education in general. I do not know enough about the IT operation to see whether all this can be turned into a business proposition as well. If it is, that would be great. But my point is that even if it cannot be so transformed, it is something that the IT sector has good reason to consider doing. Can there be a group initiative in any of these fields? Can NASSCOM itself play a catalytic role here? informational issues are thoroughly rampant in morality and politics. And in many direct and indirect ways, the preoccupation of the IT enterprise links closely with the foundations of political and moral assessment and adjudication. Even though in this presentation I'm mainly concerned on domestic issues, I should also mention in passing that the role of information and informed understanding can also be very large in the pursuit of global peace and in defeating ill-reasoned violence. When we consider how many of the brutalities in the world today are linked with ignorant hostility to cultures and practices abroad, we can appreciate the contribution of informational limitation, among other causal factors, in cross-border belligerence. I could have talked about that too, in developing some ideas presented in my last book, Identity and Violence. But given my time limits, I will resist that temptation, and also the temptation of how the IT sector globally can help on issues of environment, including global warming. I think it can play a very major role here, but I'm afraid I have to skip that. I return now to the domestic scene, in emphasizing the role of the moral domain for the IT sector to feel some responsibility towards making India a more equitable and indeed a more efficient country. I do not want to give the impression that there is not also a prudential case for going in that direction on the part of the IT sector. One of the huge obstacles to the domestic development of the IT sector is the size of the local market, which is still quite small in India, despite all the recent expansions. Indian IT has done very well in making excellent use of the global market, but competition there is likely to be increasingly fierce. Other countries are trying to learn from the experience not only of America and Europe, but also from India. And while India has some peculiar advantage in the IT field, which I've already discussed earlier in the lecture, the barriers may well be gradually removed in many countries, indeed even in many poor countries in the world. China, which has a much larger domestic market, enormously larger already than India, will continue to and will continue to expand that market very fast, is not as vulnerable as we may be in this particular respect. As it happened, one of the reasons for the larger domestic reach of IT in China is its much wider base of good basic schooling. So what is an issue of equity on one side is also a matter of central importance for prudential reasoning about domestic economic expansion on the other.